I don't know how many of you really enjoy this story of Jacob. It's really a fascinating story. And I really cannot imagine all of the ups and downs, the challenges, all of the problems, all of the difficulties, all of the things he's required to go through. But it's certainly a fascinating story. And so in Genesis 28, Jacob leaves the promised land. As night begins to overtake him, the text says that he encountered the place. That's interesting, isn't it? He encountered the place. And as he sleeps, he has a vision of a ladder joining heaven and earth. And he realizes that he has had an encounter with the God of his fathers. And so Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and clothing to put on, and I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall Adonai be my God, and the stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you shall give me, I will surely give the tithe to you. I think this is one of the strongest passages in talking about the tithe. This really comes from Jacob's heart. And as part of his vow that he makes to his God. The vow that he vowed is an if-then kind of vow. We might even stumble at this kind of vow. However, I see somewhat of a boldness here. I see something of a commitment here. And in a very real way, he puts his desires, the desires of his heart, and his prayer in this form of a vow. And we know that God honored his vow. And Jacob was called upon to honor his part of the vow. Vows are challenging for us in Scripture because the commandment says when you make your vow to God, be sure and keep it. Yes, you better keep it. And in Yeshua's day, everybody was trying to get around the real issue. And they were vowing a vow in Jerusalem and on the ark and on all this kind of stuff. And Yeshua says, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Would you allow me a little leeway here? It would be so much better if you didn't vow a vow at all. Because you're not serious about it. And just as the sages were teaching as well, don't vow. Don't even vow to God, because you'd better keep it. You'd better keep it. So much better not to vow a vow and fall short. Than to vow a vow and fall short. You see, I think we have trouble with vows, and yet there's something important here. There's something important. I know one thing. I know that God honored this vow of his. And this encounter with his God at the place prepares him for his journey and everything that lay in the unknown ahead of him. He's just been through what you would call a very intriguing time, a very trying time of family intrigue. He must leave everything behind, and he must go to the hometown of his grandfather, whom his grandfather warned his servant not to send Isaac, his father, there. And I wonder why. And so what lies ahead is an unknown, but he is an encounter with the Lord that prepares him for all that he will go through. His mother tells him to stay until his brother's anger goes away, but Jacob never hears from his mother again. 20 years later, Jacob hears Laban's sons complain, and he sees that things aren't going so well with his father-in-law. This has happened over and over again, but this time the Lord speaks to Jacob, return to the land. Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. You know, it's always the I wills of God that sustain us in the most difficult of times. I will. I will never leave you nor forsake you. As he says to Jacob, I'll be with you. And the time had come. The time had come to return to the land. After all these years, the time had finally come. I don't know. Jacob has a penchant for maybe doing things wrong. Jumping the gun. But he runs for his life, upsetting his father-in-law. His father-in-law catches up with Jacob, is warned by God, thank the Lord, and then makes a covenant with Jacob. And then Jacob and his long family are now free to make their way back into the promised land. Now, Jacob responded to his first encounter with the place by vowing a vow. And inside of this vow is this phrase. And if I come again to my Father's house in peace. I really believe that he truly wanted to be at peace with his brother. And so 20 years later, he comes back into the land. In a sense, he encounters the place again. But this time, it's with the host of heaven. And God renews the covenant and renews the promises with Jacob. Jacob calls the place two camps. Two camps. How encouraging it must have been to remember way back to his vow. And to see how his God had worked far beyond his own requests in his vow. Powerfully, God has worked. God's faithfulness to, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on. Thinking back, he must have been overwhelmed with the faithfulness of God. He must have been overwhelmed with thanksgiving and praise in his heart. Oh, what an encouragement he must have felt. God has been with me far beyond what I had asked. You know, we all need encouragement from time to time in our lives. Amen? We do. Life has this way of wearing upon you. And I think God, in his faithfulness, was encouraging his servant. But even when we seek to encourage one another, in the final analysis, it is God himself who is the encourager. Now, our spouse may help the best they can. And our children may help from time to time. And you might say, well, where does the encourager get encouragement? Of course, we all must receive the encouragement that we all need from God himself, for he is the encourager. Hosea 12 mentions Jacob, and Hosea says, he took his brother by the heel in the womb, and by his strength he struggled with God. There's a key phrase here. And by his strength. That was Jacob. That was Jacob. By his strength. He struggled with God. Yes, he wept and cried to him. He had power over the angel and overcame. I sort of wonder what that felt like. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke with us. Let me go, for the dawn is breaking. No, I won't let you go until you bless me. Now that's a bit of boldness, isn't it? That is pure boldness. I won't let you go until you bless me. I think some of the saints of old had another way of putting that, and that is praying through. Some of the old believers, they prayed through. You see, in their own way, they prayed and prayed and prayed and wouldn't let God go until he blessed them. I feel God likes that. I really do. And I think God is continually asking us, do you really mean it? You know? When you pray, do you really mean it? How much do you really mean it? So, I think this is quite remarkable. No, I won't let you go until you bless me. He hung on to Esau's heel in the womb, and now he hangs on to the angel of the Lord. I mean, it's something there in Jacob. The soup swap was for the birthright. The deception of his father was for the father's blessing. The 20 years was for his family and for his possessions. But now he wrestles with the angel of the Lord for the safety of his family and the fulfillment of all of God's promises to him. And he just hangs on. He just presses in. And of course, the angel lets him. You know, that's God. He will let us press into Him. He'll let us hang on to Him till the dawn begins to break. And then He says, okay, what you want? You know? Now, and at times, we can't figure out what is going on, but we can keep on pressing on. We may not be totally aware of what's going on, but we can keep hanging on. It is said, your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel. For explanation, you have striven with God and with men, and you've prevailed. And Jacob goes through a transformation, I believe, here. He goes through a change. And whenever we press in, whenever we hang on to God, we encounter in a new way, in a transforming way. We enter into a more intimate relationship and walk with God. He spends the night alone by the river Yabok, and a mysterious man wrestles with him all night. Jacob and God have a wrestling match, and Jacob wins. Yes, he wrestles with God. And he names this place the face of God. The face of God. For, explanation, I've seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. Whew. Yet my life is spared. And then Jacob makes some changes in his preparations, and then he walks out ahead of everyone else to meet his brother face to face. This has to be the biggest challenge in Jacob's life. He expressed that he was afraid, but his fear doesn't make him to be a coward. He has wrestled with God in prayer, and now he steps out to the forefront limping. Limping as he goes to meet his brother face to face. He's just met God face to face. Now he can meet his brother, you see. Now he can meet his brother face to face. He persevered and was wounded in the wrestling match. Some of the most used men go through the most difficult times, like Paul, who said in 2 Corinthians 12, "And by the superabundance of the revelations, that I not be made arrogant. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan, that he might buffet me, that I not be made haughty. Beyond this, I entreated the Lord 3 times that it depart from me." And what did God say? "My grace is sufficient for you, Paul, for my power is perfected in your weakness." Therefore, Paul concludes, "I will rather gladly boast in my weakness, that the power of my Messiah may overshadow me." And so the limp would testify that it was not by his own strength, not by his own power, but by the power and the strength that God gives. You see, in our wrestling and our prevailing with God, we grow in awe of Him. And as we grow in awe of Him, we grow in the reality of our own weaknesses and our own needs. For it's always by His grace. By His grace, He gives us reminders of our weaknesses, that we might not think too highly of ourselves, but remain useful to the God whom we serve. And so Paul responded by boasting in his own weaknesses so that he could continue to experience the power of his Messiah. And so Jacob limped out to meet his brother. But Jacob's troubles are not over. It seems like Jacob's life is marked by one mountain after another mountain, until he grows old and moves to Egypt to be with his beloved son. It caught him, I'm sure, by surprise. His beloved Rachel dies outside of Bethlehem while giving birth to their son, Benjamin. Well, if that wasn't enough, the incident with Dinah, Israel's daughter, takes place when Dinah went out to visit the daughters of the land. And you know what happened. Jacob is forced to leave. And so he inquires of God. And God said to Jacob, "Rise up, go to Bethel, and live there. And make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled before your brother Esau. Remember the vow you vowed." And Jacob said to his house and to all those with him, "Put away the strange gods in your midst, and purify yourselves, and change your clothing." Here's a leftover from the 20 years living in the East. You see. Here's why his grandfather, Jacob's family had sought after and had accepted some of the ways of the world, some of the idols in the world. It's time to put the strange gods away. Purify yourself and change your clothes. It reminds us of what Yeshua said, these things I command you that you love one another. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Don't be surprised if it hates you. And if you were of the world would love its own, but because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you. Do not love the world. Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, and not of the Father, but of this world. And the world is passing away, and the lusts will pass away. But the one doing the will of God, it is the one who will abide forever. And this is the will, for this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not heavy. Because everything having been born of God overcomes the world. And this is our victory overcoming the world, our faith. And so there are so many things that drag us down into the world. There are so many habits that we develop that drag us down into the world. It's the idols that Jacob's family collected. Powerful is God, who will cause each one of you to be overcomers. Overcomers. And this is the victory overcoming the world, our faith. And so he returns to Bethel to fulfill his vow. And God comes and confirms Jacob's new name of Israel, reaffirms the covenant and reaffirms the blessings with him, and reveals himself as El Shaddai, the one who is all-sufficient. El Shaddai. The word shad means breast or bosom. The suffix I is normally my, attached to a plural noun. And as a baby is completely nourished by his mother's breast, so our God nourishes us and provides for all that we need. And then Adonai shall be my God. And by his strength he struggled with God, is what the prophet revealed. And now things will be different. The all-sufficient one will be his God, the El Shaddai of all eternity. You see, at the time of the Exodus, God will tell Moses that El Shaddai was a name in which he appeared to the patriarchs. El Shaddai, the mighty one, all-sufficient one, appears as a name for God 48 times. It's most often repeated in Job, where it occurs 31 times. He appears to Abraham once, when God makes a covenant of circumcision with him. He appears to Isaac when he imparts the covenant. And with Jacob, He appears as El Shaddai twice. Twice. What a powerful revelation concerning the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the family moves to Hebron. Later, Jacob was to endure the agony of losing his beloved Joseph, whom he thought was dead. And then letting Benjamin go down into Egypt. And finally, as a frail old man, he goes down to Egypt to reunite with Joseph and to die. Through all of the events that happened to Jacob, he was learning to depend upon the all-sufficient God. And all of the events of his life thrust him upon the all-sufficient God. And all of the events of your life as well thrust you upon the all-sufficient God who longs to draw you closer to himself. And learning to depend upon him, those of the hall of faith matured in their walk with their God. And your maturity springs out of a daily walk of faithful dependence upon your all-sufficient God. And my question to each one of us here today, do you know God as El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one? Do you have an intimate daily relationship with the all-sufficient one? Are you leaning on him? Are you learning to prevail with God and man in your prayer?